if you don't consent to being recorded, to leave the session at this time. And if you could keep your microphones on mute throughout, and if you're not speaking, please also keep your cameras off as well. I think the recording has started, so I'm going to pass you over now to our speakers.
Thanks, Chloe, for doing all of that. So welcome, everyone. Good morning. It's a bit wet and cold, so I hope you're all comfortable. So today we are looking at working with risk and the adult risk management process. I am going to initially start some of the training slides that we have for you today. So I am Fiona O'Brien, and I'm the safeguarding practitioner at Kettering General Hospital. And we also have our colleagues who I believe are going to introduce themselves.
I'm Catherine Martin, a senior social worker in the practice development team in West Northants Council Adult Services.
Hi, and I'm Sarah Morris. I'm the Chief Principal Social Worker at North Northants Adult Social Care.
Thank you.
I think Paul's with us. Are you here, Paul?
Oh, yeah, I'm with you.
Lovely.
Paul Taylor from the police.
Thank you. So just to give you a brief outline as to how this session is going to work, we're all going to take sections of the training so that you're not having to listen to the same person's voice. So we will have some slides that we will go through with you, and then we will be asking for some interaction from you. This will either be using typing into a word cloud, or it might be that we ask you questions if you can verbalise or put things in the chat. For those of you that might be on mobile phones, I know that's a challenge, but please participate as much as you can. I think the more you put in, the more you can get out. So thank you for being here, and we will make a start. So what is risk? The probability that an event will occur with beneficial or harmful outcomes for a particular person or others with whom they come into contact, a product of the likelihood that an event will occur and the impact that it will have if it does occur. There will be many of us here today who will come into contact with a person who is or may be making decisions that could have a negative risk outcome. So we will be exploring this further within this session. So how do we feel about risk? I know some of us might feel uncomfortable with risk, some of us are quite confident within risk, but let's be honest, let's talk about this risk. So what we have here is a word map. So what Chloe will do is her magic. So if you could enter a word that describes how you feel about risk. Is that working? Is everyone able to put a word in somewhere? I can see some people.
Some can't, Fiona. I can see somebody's put in the chat, this bot is disabled. Contact your IT admin for more info.
There's a few coming up. Concerned. Can you see them, Fiona? Apprehensive. Inevitable.
I was hoping that the word map might bring it all up on the screen so that we could all see some of the words. So we can see that some of you have put in the chat, so scary, some of you are worried, the unknown. And I know for myself, the unknown for me is the scariest part of risk, because how do you manage the unknown? It's really difficult. We have fear again, afraid.
There's a good one there in terms of inevitable. Can't even say the word, but inevitable.
Wow, I can see there's lots of responses. Unfortunately, I can't open them up. I don't know if that's an NHS thing, because I can see my colleague isn't able to. Quantifying the unknown, absolutely.
Empowering is a good word.
Love that word. And is that empowering for the person that you're working with, empowering for you as a practitioner, as the person working with somebody? Empowering can be a huge thing, can't it, for everyone? Anxious. Yeah. Any other words that Sarah, Catherine, you can see?
I like the phrase everyday life.
I was just thinking exactly the same then, Sarah. Yeah, everyday
Risk
life,
is
of course.
everyday life.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of risk assess just stepping out your door in the morning, don't you? Do I need an umbrella? Is it going to rain? So your risk is that you're going to get wet. Obviously, a lot of us are working with more scarier things than if you're going to get wet. But in terms of risk, that's what we do every day in our life. We make decisions that could have a really positive outcome, or they could actually have a really negative outcome.
I think one that I can relate to that's up here is exciting.
Okay.
Risk can sometimes be exciting for people, you know, depending on what you might do. If you're into certain kind of sports, it can be quite exhilarating. You know, people go to theme parks. There's risk going on certain rides, isn't there? But actually, there's an element of excitement and thrill that comes with risk.
Absolutely.
I can see we've got a lot of anxiety being used. Would anyone like to share their feelings, their thoughts around what they mean by anxiety? Would anyone be willing to speak? Don't worry if not.
For me, I feel like anxiety is obviously a healthy emotion, isn't it? But I think taking a risk is, for me, like the worry of it going wrong. And obviously anxiety is kind of overestimating like the likelihood of something going wrong. So it kind of just grows, I suppose, when there's a risk. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to take the risk, and I'll just stay comfortable just in case it goes wrong. So that's kind of where my point of view is.
And I suppose anxiety, although it's something that we think about, it's something that actually can form in our bodies as well. And we then react in health ways, don't we? So we can get the stomach upsets and the sickness and all of those things. So absolutely, I think anxiety, it can become a bigger ball than what it started off with. And as Chloe was saying, we start to think about what could happen, and then if that happens, what about this? And you just start going off in lots of other places, and in the end you might not then decide to take that risk because it's a too big a thing, or if you're the other way, you take the risk anyway because you'll deal with it later. So yeah, anxiety, again, it's a huge one. And I think as professionals working with people who are living in risk averse situations, anxiety for all of us is like the what ifs. What can we do? How do we manage that? It's a big thing, absolutely. Yeah, gut feeling. And we all work with gut feeling as well. I think we all have that kind of instinct, and it can, as you say, save us. And if we don't trust that gut feeling, it can also have that negative feeling if something goes wrong and not taking risk and assessing the risks. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else on how we feel about risk? Anyone want to share anything else before we move on?
I think, I don't know if you can hear me, but I think I struggle when working with other agencies when I've judged a risk differently to another agency, for example, and then that makes me anxious because I think, am I being overzealous, or, you know, and it's hard to work with that when other agencies aren't necessarily judging the risk as high as you or low. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think we all have different, well, we will have our own perceptions of risk, and that could be a personal thing. It could be something that you work with more often. It might be somebody who doesn't work with it as often. It might be training. It might be the learning around that particular risk. So absolutely, we will all go into a situation and manage that risk within our own management skills, won't we? But absolutely, when you go out and you've got somebody else who's saying, no, it's fine, absolutely, you can go in that house, there's no risk there, and you walk in and there's, you know, lots of things that are very risky. So absolutely, and I think that does come down to risk assessing before you go out. You can only do so much, can't you? And I think within housing, going into tenants' addresses, you will do your own risk assessment based on the information that you have. But you might not always have that information from other services. So yeah, absolutely, different varying risk levels, risk knowledge and risk management. Yeah, very difficult. Yeah, so somebody's put working with adults, there may be a history of risk from childhood. Did you want to explain that one a little bit more for everyone, if you feel happy to?
Yeah, that's fine. So yeah, I work in mental health, so there can be a lot of adults that display certain risks. So there is some inkling of things. I think obviously things can change, but if there is a known risk, that I suppose knowledge is power, as they say, and so that can be planning for that, and it can show a barometer where there might be some positive risk taking in the future if someone's known that you don't always tarnish someone with the risk from history, that things can change and things can get better.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Anyone else?
I think we've covered what was the main ones that were in the word map.
Yeah.
Thanks, Fiona.
Thanks, Sarah. So we'll move on to the next slide. So this is an important point of reflection, and myself and Sarah and Catherine actually felt that this was quite an important part of the presentation, and we wanted to start with this. So it's something that some of you may have heard before. So what good is it making someone safer if it merely makes them miserable? Physical health and safety can sometimes be bought at too high a price in happiness and emotional welfare. The emphasis must be on sensible risk appraisal, not striving to avoid all risk, whatever the price, but instead seeking a proper balance and being willing to tolerate manageable or acceptable risks as the price appropriately to be paid in order to achieve some other good, in particular to achieve the vital good of the elderly or vulnerable person's happiness. What good is it making someone safer if it merely makes them miserable? And I think for me, the emphasis here is seeking a balance. So when we talk about risk, we've said about positive risks, negative risks, and for some people, they're living in this constant risk management process, and it's about trying to get that balance for them. We're not trying to take risks away from anybody. It's about supporting somebody within the risk that they're living with and trying to get that balance of support for them. But we just thought we wanted to share that slide with you, because we do know that things are said around risk and it making people miserable. We're trying to take away, and I think going back to the word empowerment kind of sits well with this, is that we are striving to get that proper balance and empowering the person to take control of their own risk-taking behaviour. Anything else that wants to be said on that slide? You happy? Thank you. So what are our responsibilities? So some of you will, I'll just quickly read through the list. So you've got the Care Act, so the Care Act 2014. We have the Section 42 safeguarding, making safeguarding personal. We have the ARM, the Adult Risk Management Process. We have person-centred working, so risk enabling. The Mental Capacity Act 2005, the Principles of Mental Capacity Act, Best Interest, the Mental Health Act, Northamptonshire Safeguarding Board, and the local.gov.uk, a framework for understanding and assessing risk. So a lot of us will have had some knowledge of this. We will be using this within our job roles at the moment. We will follow this legislation, these frameworks. Some of us won't have heard of these before, but there are all things that we can use to support us when working with adults who are risk-taking. Is everyone aware of these things that we've got listed on the screen? Has everyone seen it? Know of them? Thank you. Yeah, I think some of us will have at least used one of them, if not 3, 4 of them. But if you ever need to know what any of them are, if you go onto the NSAB website, again, I know I will keep banging on about it, wealth of knowledge. If you need to know anything, go on the website and get that information. Thank you. I believe I'm handing over to one of our colleagues.
You are, thank
Sarah.
you. Thanks, Fiona. Okay, so I wanted to talk about risk enabling. And we wanted to talk about risk enabling because of exactly what Fiona's just been talking about, that concept that actually we want to think about positive risk taking. So what is risk enabling? So it's a series of steps by which you can engage with and manage that risky situation or activity. And it involves supporting adults and or their carers to identify and assess risks and then support them to take the risk they choose. And I thought, I was making some notes as people were doing that word cloud earlier, because there were a couple of things I thought. Number one, actually, it's a really good thing. We talked about gut instinct, didn't we? That gut feeling. And I think we all have those. But actually, when we're assessing and managing risk and enabling risk, it's really important that we're looking at the evidence behind that. So I've got that gut feeling. Right, now, what is it that's giving me a gut feeling? Where's the evidence for that? So what is that risk really? And also, I think that whilst this says supporting adults and their carers to identify and assess risks, it's also doing that with our colleagues, isn't it, across other agencies? So it's that chance to talk together about the things we're worried about and actually maybe reassure one another or assess that risk together. And again, I think that this last point is really important. It's about equality, isn't it? We all take positive risks. You'll do it, I do it, we make our choices. Why can't somebody with care and support needs do so as well? That is equality. People should have the same rights as us, shouldn't they? So I know, I was thinking back on this, when I was young, going backpacking around other countries and staying in some very cheap hotels with some very poor security. I'm sure my parents were concerned about me. However, they supported my right to take positive risks, and the confidence that gave me was fantastic. So, thanks, Chloe. So having just been thinking about how we feel about risk, how do you feel about risk enabling and what are the benefits? So because we're not just looking for a word here, we can't do it in a word cloud, but if people feel comfortable to pop something in the chat or put your hands up, that would be great. When you think about risk enabling, what do you think? How does that make you feel? And what are the benefits to risk enabling? Yeah, empowerment, freedom, building confidence, absolutely. Yeah, inclusive advocacy allows people to take personal responsibility. Yeah. Opportunities, yeah, definitely. Independence. Yeah, promoting rights. Yeah. Learning from our mistakes, that's a really important one, isn't it? That actually, yeah. The fact is, we take all sorts of risks and sometimes they go wrong and we can learn from them and actually then move on to do better the next time. Living in the uncomfortable, yeah.
That's a good point, living in the uncomfortable, because that's a tricky one as professionals, isn't it, to sit with. And I'm sure we've all had experiences where we're lying in bed at night thinking about, oh gosh, something's happening to this person, the risk, and actually also from a professional point of view, we're going to get into trouble, have I covered everything, let alone sometimes that sits more uncomfortable for us as professionals than it does actually for the person, doesn't it?
Mm.
And then by default, the consequences are that we become more defensive in our practice, don't we?
I think you're right, absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point, Wayne. The assumption of capacity, and we can make unwise choices. We're going to come on to that in a sec. Thank you. Thanks, Chloe. Oh, sorry. Did somebody want to say something? No. Okay, thank you. Okay, so the benefits of risk enabling. Yeah, so it recognises that taking considered risks can enable individuals and help improve their well-being. So I think, as we've just been talking about, think about a time you've taken a risk and it's paid off. How good did it feel? It offers people independence and control. It's a rebalance in power, and it places the person in the position of an expert in their own lives. So actually, how would you feel if somebody else decided the risks that you could take? Actually, it's my life. I can make the choices I want to make. But also, as we've just said, it supports the worker, us, to look at risk in context. Oh, can people pop themselves on mute, please? Thank you. And it supports the worker to identify strengths and abilities. So actually, it is that opportunity to work through actually exactly what the risk is and what are the strengths that the person has to support them in taking that risk. And people talked about making mistakes. It's provides an area for learning and development. And that importance of that anti-oppressive practice, that actually we don't have the right to tell others what to do if they have the capacity to make those decisions themselves. Thanks, Chloe. So just moving on to how we manage and enable risk. And we've pinched some of this from the Social Care Institute for Excellence. And they talk about 4 stages in assessing, managing, enabling risk. The first one being understanding the person's circumstances. So Lady Hale of the Court of Protection, she said, risk is a part of everyday life. And people with disabilities, both mental and physical, have the same human rights as the rest of the human race. It may be that those rights have sometimes to be limited or restricted because of their disabilities, but the starting point should be the same as that for everyone else. So we know there are situations where people lack capacity, and we do use the Mental Capacity Act. There are situations in which the Mental Health Act is used. But generally, as adults, we have the right to make decisions. And I think when we're understanding the person's circumstances, it's really important. When I talk about this, I talk every step is ask the person themselves. So what's important to them? What are their goals? And how have they managed risk in the past? We all know how we've managed and minimised risk in the past. How have they done so? And then stage 2 is identifying risks, and this includes the protective factors. So the first step of the risk assessment process is to jointly work with the individual, with or without the support of another person. And I think somebody put something about advocacy in the chat earlier. So, the importance of considering advocacy for somebody to enable us to understand what the activity means to them, why is it important for them, and what is the impact, what impact being able or unable to undertake the activity will have on their individual well-being. And to me, this is really important. When we're assessing risk, we need to assess risk not only of them undertaking an activity, but also of them not getting to do that. Actually, what would be the impact on their mental health, their emotional well-being if they don't do that? I mean, I was thinking about this and I was thinking of some examples. So people will worry, won't they, about people who go out on their motorbike or go mountain biking and come careering down the hillside and the physical risks involved in that. But actually, think of the excitement, the pleasure that gives people. And what about that opportunity when you resign from your really secure job to go chasing your dreams? Actually, there are risks involved there, aren't there? But the opportunity is huge, and actually people may well, there may be a real risk of staying in that secure job if it makes you really unhappy. Clearly, when we're doing all this, we need to be considering the Mental Capacity Act. You know, if somebody doesn't have capacity, then we would be needing to do this in terms of making best interest decisions. Thanks, Chloe. So, when we're assessing the impact and the likelihood of risks, as we said, as a practitioner, it's not our responsibility to take risk away. We should be supporting the individual with their unique strengths, ability, and aspirations to make decisions that matter to them. And we need to support them in understanding the likelihood and the impact of the identified potential benefits and harms, what's important for them alongside what is important to them and why. So actually, that's about understanding what is the likelihood that this might happen, and if it did, what would be the consequences? Are we talking about something that could have fatal consequences? Are we talking about something that might go wrong, but actually we would learn from it and we would pick ourselves up and move on? Is it something that could happen this afternoon? Or is it something that actually might happen in the future, and we can work with the person to build up those protective factors? And it's essential there's an evidence-based analysis of the severity and likelihood of harm which could arise. You know, there can be lots of situations where there'll be lots of people saying, this is awful, this is a huge risk. Well, actually, let's sit down together and talk through this and assess it clearly so we understand that. And then when we've done that, we need to manage risk with the person. So not all risk can be reduced or mitigated. And I think, you know, if we're in our jobs, that's something we have to accept, isn't it? We know that. They can be managed if they've been properly identified and assessed. On some occasions, the management of risk entails reduction or mitigation. It's the adult and or carer's right to make choices and take risks once they understand the information available and aware of the risks. So what we really want at the end of that is a risk plan, a risk enablement plan that we've all signed up to, that might include contingency plans. What are we going to do if things do start to go wrong? And that talk about how we're going to monitor and review that. So hopefully actually the person can build on what they've achieved through their risk enablement. Thanks, Chloe. And then finally, for my bit, we just wanted to touch on how we might use the ARM process to manage risk. On most occasions, we'll be supporting people to take risks positively without needing to use the ARM process. But there may be situations where we are significantly worried about the level of risk to somebody who has capacity, where we think that they are at risk of serious harm or death. And in that situation, we might be using the adult risk management process. And again, I'm going to join Fiona and Chloe in pointing you to the NSAB, the Northamptonshire Safeguarding Adults Board website. The ARM guidance and paperwork is on there. And I'm also going to promote that in the new year, please do look out for adverts. We have reviewed and revised the ARM process, so please do look out for briefings that will be coming out about the new guidance. So just quickly, many of you will know this anyway, but the ARM process is a multi-agency approach to assessing risks and mitigating them, working with an adult at risk of serious harm or death who has the capacity to make decisions around that risk. And ARM meetings can be called by anyone. So And when calling one, you should invite the person and all relevant agencies. And I think what's really good about the ARM process is statutory agencies have a responsibility to engage. So actually, if we're calling an ARM, then those statutory agencies need to engage in that and have that multidisciplinary discussion about the risks. ARM meetings should involve the person themselves, and there's a reminder there to consider the need for advocacy. And they should be based on their strengths. As we keep saying, that person's opinion of the risks as well, and their wishes are vital. However, an ARM can progress even if the person does not wish to be involved at all. So ARMs can be really good for situations where we are really concerned about the risks somebody is facing, but they don't want to have that conversation and be engaged. But an ARM is an opportunity to develop a relationship with a person. So it might be about identifying who's the best person to develop that relationship and gain the person's trust. So it might be talking about, we're not in a position yet really to be working with the person to enable risk, because actually they don't really trust us. They don't want to be involved in that conversation. But maybe we can build up that trust through the health visitor or the neighbour or the housing officer with whom they actually have a really good relationship. And maybe over time we can then engage them in that conversation about how we support and enable risk. So ARM meetings agree and then review an action plan with responsible people and timescales, allowing us to constructively challenge and support one another to work together to support the person. And you know, when I talk with people about ARM, when it works well, this is exactly it's the opportunity for us all to come together and say, right, okay, we've identified what the risks are with this person. Which bit are we all going to support with? Right, we're going to come back in 4 weeks' time, and by that point, we all know what we will have, the actions we will have undertaken, and then we can review again. Thank you, Chloe. And what would that risk enabling plan look like? Okay, so as I said, it should include what's the actions that have been agreed, how will the actions be carried out, and what's the significance to their success? Who will be responsible for them and what's the time frame? How will good communication be ensured? How do we make sure we're all talking to each other so information hasn't been lost? What could go wrong and how to overcome it? You know, what's our contingency plan? Things may go wrong along the way. What could go well and how do we build on it? So actually, you know, when people take that step and decide they want to move into supported living and decrease the level of support, how do we review and say, actually, this is going really well? What's the next step we can take? Allow them to take the next set of risks and positive risks. And how do we review that plan and agree the time scale? So I'm now going to hand you over to Catherine, and we're going to think about that in a scenario situation.
Before we do have a question from Joe in the chat. Would you use ARM for people at risk of suicide? Joe, do you feel that Sarah kind of went through the slides and gave you some indication, or would you like some more clarification on that question? That's for Joe Breen. No worries. Do go and look at the NSAB website under ARM, and I think look at the criteria. I don't think we could say, yes, that scenario you should be referring into ARM. I think there's lots of factors within that, but if you look at the guidance and the criteria that we use, you would then use that to gauge whether your particular client would be able or should be able to meet that ARM criteria. But potentially, yes, you could use it for that person, but please take a look.
Lovely, over to me. So, well, in a kind of roundabout way, it's over to you guys in a minute, to be fair, but you should have a scenario up in front of you. So I will read it out for you guys. Don't worry about making notes because we will keep this slide up even if I've still got to move forward onto another one. So we're going to talk about Richard. Richard is a 46-year-old man who's been living on the streets. sleeping in a tent for the last 6 years and stating to the rough sleeping team, with whom he's got a very good relationship with, that he doesn't wish to consider moving, although he is prepared to accept accommodation when SWEP is enacted. For any of you guys that are not familiar with SWEP, that's obviously in relation to when the temperatures hit a certain freezing point. Someone can probably say it in a better way than I can, that obviously that team goes out onto the streets and provides some accommodation for people, so that they can at least during those freezing periods have some warmth. He's known to NHFT and he has a diagnosis of psychosis, but his community psychiatric nurse isn't confident as to whether he's taken his medication regularly. Richard has been drinking daily for many years, and workers often must visit him a few times if he's too drunk to discuss anything specific when they visit first. Richard has been referred to S2S, however, has not attended any of the several appointments made. It's been noted that he's lost significant amounts of weight recently. Richard has attended the local hospital emergency department due to physical health concerns, however, has left the service before diagnosis and treatment. Richard has an ulcer on his leg, which workers are really worried about, and they are trying to encourage him to engage with his GP to have this treated. Richard talks about his good friends who also live on the street and with whom he likes to spend time with, and who he sees as a huge support to him. The local community knows him well and often provides him with food and hot drinks. They've got to know the rough sleeping team worker too, and let them know if they are particularly worried about Richard. Now, I would kind of assume, probably from all your guys' experience, that you could probably relate to this gentleman. He is based on a real life person, but I think probably there's a good chance that we've all worked with somebody very, very similar to Richard. So if you could just move along for me, please, Chloe, thank you. So what we'd like you to do is look at these questions and go into the chat and have a think about, actually, you know, what are the identified risks for Richard? What are the risks from others? Are there risks from others? What impact may these risks have on Richard's daily life? What are the positives? What are the protective factors? And what are the possible benefits of these risks to Richard? And how could these risks best be managed through the ARM process? What could be included in the risk enablement plan? So it's almost kind of bringing everything together that we've talked about so far. Chloe is going to put these questions into the chat, so you don't have to make notes on them. So if you could start typing, or if you want to, if anybody's brave enough to kind of put their hand up and talk us through them, that would be really great. Absolutely, James. The ulcer on his leg is a health risk, 100%. Safety risks by sleeping rough from being assaulted. We know that there's quite a lot of crime related to people that are street homeless. Yep, drinking every day is a risk to his health. Oh, someone's put in there that they're currently doing SWEP referrals now, so everyone quickly take a note of a name, of a contact details. There's a risk around medication compliance. Yep, you're right, Gemma. There's a risk of mental health deterioration due to not taking medication, or we're not absolutely sure. Not attending appointments, so no input from professionals. Capacity could fluctuate with drinking and excess to make decisions. Community help would diminish if he was not a regular presence on the street. So there's quite a lot of risks there. Absolutely. So protective factors. Let's move on to the protective factors. Excellent. So Ashley, rough sleeping, team and friends. Absolutely. Jennifer, communicating with his friends. The local community are keeping an eye on him. Absolutely. And they're alerting the services. Gino, he's got good friends, local community know him well and provide him with food and hot drinks.
Yeah,
So
I
what
like.
would we be? Oh,
sorry,
Sarah.
Sorry,
I was
Catherine. I was going
reading.
to say I like Laurie's point about there's multi-agent involvement, even if he's not engaging with services, they're aware of him. I like, you know, in terms of ARM, that's great, isn't it? You've got a lot of people there with a lot of experience who can come together to support him.
Absolutely. And even if it's not under the arm, there's still other processes like safeguarding. There isn't anything to stop anybody from calling a professionals meeting as well, to actually have this collaborative approach, and kind of try and minimise some of the risks that are presenting to him. Absolutely, Jennifer, it's positive. He is attending health appointments, without a doubt. Yes, they may be sporadic and there may not be a real clarity around his medication, but it's still really important that we look at actually the positive things, and the areas of enabling. So what are the benefits really? What are the benefits to Richard? So if you were to talk to Richard, what is he going to say are the benefits for him? What is he telling us? What do we know about him? Well, he's telling us that he wants to be on the streets, isn't he? Okay, we can kind of have a discussion around actually, is that a capacious decision? But actually, he is able to form positive relationships, isn't he? Because he's got a good relationship with the rough sleeping team. He's clear about what his choices are, what his options are, what his decision is at this moment in time. He's able to use his voice. He's making his choice to be homeless. I'm just reading, and taking some control of how he wants to live. I know that that's always up for debate, and I think we have to be really kind of mindful about language, such as lifestyle choice, particularly when it comes to people that are using substances and homelessness. That's the language that, you know, in terminologies that we wouldn't obviously be using at this point, and nowadays. Positive relationships with others in similar situations, so they've got shared experiences. What is important to him? Absolutely, he might have some hope as he is being supported. So as professionals, what would you be putting in your risk enabling plan then? What would you put in it? So he was under an arm, or actually wasn't under an arm, but you would be working with him. What would you be putting in terms of how he's managing those risks, or how you would be managing those risks with somebody else? And with Richard, what would you put in the plan? Absolutely, Chloe. Regular check-ins. There's clear visits. There's contact schedules. Absolutely. There is, like we say, that we've got other professionals around him. We've got CPNs that are around him. That there is a team that are going out on a regular basis. There is a community. So you would be forming that as part of his risk plan, wouldn't you? Risk enabling. Jennifer's put, home is not a building, it's a state of mind, and he could be at home in his tent. Jennifer, tell us a little bit more about that, because that's interesting, and it's a good kind of way to look at what a home means to a person. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Hi, yes, certainly, Catherine. I think I met someone, in my neighborhood, and he likes to camp a lot. And he's got a camper van where, that's where he does his day to day. He goes to work and all that. And I said to him, so does that mean that you are homeless in a way? He was like, no, I'm not homeless. I'm just houseless. I don't have a house, but doesn't mean I don't have a home. So just that interaction with him actually got me thinking and saying, you know what, a house is just a building. A home is wherever you feel the love, the security, the safety. I know, yes, his condition, his situation is not ideal, in this part of the world that we're living in. But social work is global, and you think globally. And in some neighborhood, in some culture, living in a tent it's perfectly okay. It's normal. And again, it's within the context of the fact that I'm just assuming that he's in Northampton, and living in a tent is not ideal. It's frowned upon. It's like almost like a nuisance, because you've just got a tent, just pop it somewhere in the bush or somewhere, and people would frown about that, isn't it? Because, like, yeah, you shouldn't be living in a tent. So it's that cultural acceptance, that societal acceptance of we all have to be living in a house. We all need to be in a house to feel that safety, that security. So that's why I said, home. Home is where your heart is, where your treasure is. You can find home anywhere. You could be, like you said, you could be traveling anywhere, and just pitching a tent at that point could be a time whereby you felt at home. You felt loved. You felt cared for. You felt comfort. And for him, in this case, for Richard, that tent could be his place of security, safety, and yeah, that's my take on it. Thank you. Over to you,
Jennifer,
Catherine.
I think it's a perfect description. It's a wonderful description. You're absolutely spot on, and I think central to all of what you're saying in the importance is that is getting to know Richard and understanding Richard. And I know we kind of say that's kind of quite obvious, but really understanding what does it mean to him to be living in a tent? Does it mean this? Is that, where does his own values and ethics sit? And I think that's the real importance of why we started today with about how do we feel about risk ourselves? How do we feel about those things? Because actually we have to be honest about how we feel about certain risky situations to be aware and reflect on that, to make sure that we don't actually put our values and our kind of worries and concerns about risk onto the person that we're actually supporting. So we need to be kind of mindful about that. So yes, you're absolutely right. In this kind of temperatures, it's not ideal for anybody to be street homeless or living in a tent. However, if that is a relationship that you formed with him and he is saying, actually, this is what it means to me, this is where we need to be clear about the benefits of that risk for that person, and go back to what Fiona originally spoke about in the reflecting on the point that we said about what is the point of making someone miserable just to eliminate risk. So I think it's a great perspective to look from that, Jennifer, but that is really central about understanding a person. So I'm just looking in more, liaison with support friendships to try and support Richard to receiving appropriate treatment, absolutely, to try and reduce risks, to health and well-being, may help reduce anxiety about attending appointments. So basically, there's lots and lots of things that we can do, isn't there? And there is lots of positive things here about Richard and what community has around them. We may not necessarily always agree, or actually sometimes have some concerns about the people that may be around him, or whether or not they might exploit him at times. But actually, those are the people, that is his community. So actually, part of a risk enabling plan, you would maybe want to bring some of those people into that risk enabling. What is it that they bring to him for support? Is it a conversation? Is it that they share food at times? All of those things. So yes, it might not be ideal, but it is about actually what things can we put in a risk enabling plan and to support the situation moving forward and reduce the risks that are in a way that isn't oppressive to Richard. Thanks, Chloe. So ultimately, what it will come down to is defensible decision making. That's what we're really going to be looking at, isn't it, in terms of any plan that we put forward needs to be well considered and evidenced. Again, it goes back to actually being honest about our fears and concerns about risk. Is that evidence-based? So when we're recording and putting plans together, is it based on evidence that we're saying that? Or is it based on our own anxieties that we're driving that? So our defensible decision making needs to be well considered and evidence. Once that is evidence-based, which uses all the information available to you all of the time, where the information has been thoroughly evaluated and analysed. So that's about getting that from different sources, isn't it? And weighing that evidence up, which has been weighed up in different outcomes and options before deciding. Bear in mind, this is also about ensuring that you involve the person in this. This is not about doing making defensible decisions just on your own. This is about actually, are you including consultation with your managers? Are you in ARM meetings and actually sharing that risk with other people in order to come to a defensible decision when we look at risk and a risk plan, that it follows policy and I'm going to struggle to say that, legislative responsibilities and duties. Is it recorded in a way which evidences all of the above? That's really, really important. And obviously, we're not wanting to teach you to suck eggs, but we know in terms of any kind of SARS, any situations, that recording and communicating is a real kind of issue at most SARS that we come across nationally, isn't it, in terms of are we communicating with each other, but are we actually clearly recording what we've communicated? Because it goes back to the same old, if it isn't recorded, it didn't happen. So it is about making sure that we recorded all of those situations. Thanks, Chloe. So our main takeaways from today, central to any of them, is involve the person. You cannot put together a good risk enabling plan without some consultation with the person. And none of us are oblivious to the fact that actually some people that you are working with are very difficult to get hold of and get into one place and to be able to have a conversation. But we're not saying that risk enabling plans have to be done on that date and in that moment and entirely, done in an hour. This is about using the resources that you have, using those kind of snippets, that little bit of time that you have with that person. Involve other services that may know the person, including family. Communicate, obviously, is absolutely central. Share the concerns, risk with others. It is not one service's responsibility to manage. And I think that's obviously what NSAB is saying across the board, and we're all saying it, that yes, there may be, for example, adult services where the statutory service, obviously for safeguarding, but actually it's all our responsibility. Our responsibilities don't end at the point we put in a referral. They don't end the moment that we've been to a meeting. Risk enabling and working with risk is ongoing. Look out for information about the revised ARM guidance and briefings on this. And what we've got at the end is safeguarding contacts. So obviously you'll get sent out these anyway, so you don't need to scribble them down, but you've got NGH's safeguarding, KGH, NHFTs, EMASs, obviously how you can do referrals to West Northants Council in relation to concerns, and the same with the North, and also the vulnerable adults, Northants Police as well. And obviously ICB, and what we've also, excuse me, what we've also put at the end is just some essential resources. Like Sarah said earlier, most of the slides that we've done today are from Skills for Care. So it's a really good, useful resource to go to. The Care and Support Statutory Guidance is really helpful for anybody, really. I mean, personally, I always think that guidance are much more helpful than the actual bulk of the legislation itself. It's a much more go-to guide in terms of, you know, how to, and there's a bit more nitty-gritty in it for me. Obviously, Northamptonshire Safeguard and Adults Board, there is loads and loads of resources on there. Obviously, as different services, you need to access your own agency's guidance, the resources and practice leads, utilise your supervision. From a social work perspective, I'm going to be utterly biased, but please use your supervision to reflect on risk and how we manage risk. Use your time to really hone down on how you, and reflect on how you're managing it. Are we being oppressive? Or are we not doing enough? And look out for communications again about the launch of the reviewed and revised ARM guidance and paperwork. Any questions? Oh, a minute over. No, no questions. Oh, thanks, Chloe. I was going to forget this. So there is an evaluation form. I think you put it into the chat as well, don't you, Chloe, if I'm right in thinking, so I'm sure you did that yesterday.
Yeah, I've just popped it in, Catherine.
Fabulous. If you can please fill that in, because that would be really helpful. I know sometimes we get absolutely fed up with evaluation forms and typing things in, but they are really important that we do them, so that if there's any other things that we need to consider moving forward. I've just seen Jennifer, you've got your hand up. Sorry, I missed you.
Yeah, I didn't want anyone to feel like we had no questions, but I just wanted to say thank you very much. That it was a really interesting training, and yeah, it was really good to sort of hear from you guys and talk about risk. And I do enjoy the ward cloud. That's really helpful. Thank you very much to all the speakers.
Thank you,
Well
Jennifer.
done.
No, thank you all for your you know, for all your contributions. It would have been nothing without you all contributing, so that's brilliant. Thanks. Yeah, I think we are sending the slides out, aren't we, Chloe, or will they be on the website?
I will circulate the slides if that's okay with you three, and then the recording will be on the website probably early next year.
Fabulous.
And then there's just a reminder before you go about the Northamptonshire, the NSAB website, obviously again to access all the resources, and to receive a certificate of attendance, please complete the evaluation form for each event attended. The form can be accessed using the link. The evaluation form link will also be circulated to you via the email. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Catherine, we do have James who'd like to stay on and have
Yeah.
a chat with us. Is that okay with you both?
Yeah, fine. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no worries.
Thank you.